please turn in your Bibles today to the book of Judges, chapter 4. Say, Pastor, you're going to preach out of Judges on Mother's Day? I sure am. Today when I read, I'm going to be reading from the New International Version, and the title of today's message is Maternal Traits. We're talking about the traits of a mother. I recently heard about a second grade teacher who taught a lesson on the magnet and what it does. She showed all of her students what magnets do and how they work and talked to them about that. And then the next day, in a written test, she included the following question. My name has 6 letters. The first one is M. I pick things up. What am I? The teacher was shocked the next day when she looked and found that over 50% of the test didn't say magnet, but instead they said mother. She was shocked because while mothers do pick things up, mothers are much more than magnets, gathering up their children's toys and clothes and picking up trash around the house. A mother's most important role is that of leading, guiding, and teaching her children. Her role is molding them, and in doing so, molding the future of our society. And because of this important job, there are certain traits that every mother should strive to have. And today, on this most special of days, I want us to take some time to look at a few of those traits. I want to encourage every mother who's here today to evaluate your life and see if these traits are present. And while we're at it, those of you who are here today who are not mothers, I want to challenge you to do the same thing. Because these traits, while they're great for every mother to have, they're beneficial for every person to have. Now, before we begin, I do want you to know that this is in no way meant to be an exhaustive list of all the traits of a mother. If I were to decide today to write a book on all the traits that a mother needs to have, and I sat down and started writing today, it would take me several years to be able to finish that book, and then it would be an abysmal failure because there's no way that I could capture all of the traits that a mother needs to have. So we're going to look at just a few traits today, and these are traits that are found in a woman named Deborah. Deborah, as we will find out, was a judge in Israel. In fact, she was one of only 12 people to have ever held that title, according to the Word of God, and she was the only one who was a woman. Now, if you're not aware of what a judge was in Israel, it wasn't the judges like we see on television. It wasn't Judge Judy or Judge Mathis or even, I can't remember his name, Judge Wapner, for those old people like me who remember him. A judge in Old Testament Israel was the leader of the nation before the nation of Israel had kings. And Deborah was one of these judges, but being more than just being a judge, Deborah is described in the Bible as being a mother of Israel. In fact, it's that designation that inspired me to center our focus on Deborah today. I want us to look together at Judges chapter 4, which is where we're introduced to Deborah. But before we do, I'm going to set the scene for you. So in the Old Testament book of Joshua, the nation of Israel moved into the land that had been promised to them by God. And the land was divided between all of the tribes. And then when Joshua was an old man, he called the nation of Israel together. And he challenged them with a question. He said, choose this day who you're going to serve. He essentially said, you've been exposed to a lot of different gods. He said, you know, they served certain gods in Egypt, and then the people who lived in this land here served gods. And he said, decide today who you're going to serve. Well, the people said, we're going to serve the Lord. And when they did, their covenant with the Lord was renewed. And sometime later, Joshua died, and he was buried. And then after he died, that next generation remained faithful to the Lord. they followed God and they followed his laws and his decrees, and they did all that he would want them to do. But the next generation, those who had not been alive to have experienced all the miraculous things that the Lord had done to deliver the people from Egypt and then drive out the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, those people began to turn away from the Lord and begin to serve other gods. And when they did, that's when the Lord began to raise up judges who would save the people and lead them back to the Lord and restore a right relationship with him. And it was in one of these periods of falling away, because it turned into a cycle where the nation of Israel would come back to the Lord and then they would fall away, and then they would come back to the Lord and they would fall away. And in one of these periods of falling away, we're introduced to Deborah in Judges chapter 4. In this chapter, we learn that the Israelites had been delivered into the hands of Jabin, the king of Canaan. And Jabin had a guy named Sisera who was in charge of his army. It was an extremely large army. The Bible tells us that in addition to all the foot soldiers, that Sisera led 900 chariots. So today, that's where we're going to pick up our story. We're going to begin reading in verse 4 of Judges chapter 4. And here's what it says. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. Verse number 7, I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give them into your hands. Barak said to her, if you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. Verse number 9, certainly I will go with you, said Deborah. But because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. There Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 men went up under his command. Deborah also went up with him. Now we're going to skip the next few verses because they basically just describe how the people set up and prepared for battle. But in verse number 14, Deborah gives the command to go into battle, and the battle begins. And in verse 15, we learn that Sisera's army was routed, that the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Israelites, and that Sisera got out of his chariot and fled on foot. In other words, he snuck away. And then in verse 16, it says that Barak and his men pursued Sisera's army, and that all Sisera's troops fell by the sword. Not a man was left. Church, this is an awesome example of the Lord saving his people and delivering them from a captor, restoring their relationship with him. But today what I want us to do is I want us to focus on Deborah, and I want to point out several traits that this mother of Israel had. The first thing I want you to notice is that she was a woman of God. Deborah was clearly a woman of God. She had a relationship with the Lord. She not only spoke to him, she also spoke for him. The Lord revealed things to Deborah, and then she shared them with others. The Bible actually refers to her as a prophet, as one who speaks for the Lord. But in addition to that, we know that she has a strong relationship with the Lord, because when God told her to call Barak and to tell him to go attack Sisera, to take 10,000 men into war, she told him without any hesitation. Listen, I don't lead a nation. I barely lead a church. But I got to tell you, every time that I have to make a decision that's going to affect your lives, it weighs on me so heavily. I always question it, and I question whether it's me or whether it's the Lord and whether it's the right thing to do. Deborah didn't hesitate at all. Deborah's relationship with God was so strong that she sent 10,001 men into battle. She had faith to know that it was the Lord that told her to say that. She was a woman of God. And church, I don't believe that there is any trait that we could desire more to see in our mothers than for them to be women of God. In Proverbs chapter 31, there's a passage about a good wife. And in verse 30, it says, "Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised." It is important for a mother to be a woman of God. And again, this isn't just an important trait for mothers, it's an important trait for all of us. A relationship with the Lord is the single most important thing that we can have in our lives. Jesus himself was asked what the most important commandment was, and he responded in Luke 10:27 by saying, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind." Jesus said it's important to love the Lord. It's important to be a man or a woman of God. The first trait that we see in Deborah is that she was a woman of God. The second trait, if you're taking notes today, that I want you to notice is that Deborah was a woman of wisdom. We read here that she held court under the palm of Deborah. They named a tree after her. She held court under the palm of Deborah, and that the Israelites would go and they would take their disputes to her, and she would decide on them. People trusted her wisdom. They were willing to yield themselves to her decisions. Listen, church, I can't tell you what a big deal this was. In that day and age, for people to go to a woman and listen to her was huge. You see, at that time, many people still viewed women, wrongly so, as essentially possessions. Women were not the leaders. Women were not in charge. The fact that people would come to Deborah, to a woman, to have their issues sorted out is a huge testament to her wisdom. They trusted her wisdom so much that they were willing to put their lives in her hands. I also find it interesting that Deborah is the only one of the judges. Out of all 12 judges in the Bible, she's the only one who it spells out served in this judicial type role. All of the others were just military leaders. She's the only one that it said would weigh in on people's lives and decide for them when they had a problem. Deborah was a woman of wisdom. I'm again reminded of the good wife in Proverbs chapter 31. In verse 26 it says, "She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue." It is important that mothers are women of wisdom. It's important for all of us to seek wisdom, especially in this day and age. We live in a confused and confusing world right now. Most of us are presented on a weekly, if not daily basis with decisions that impact the lives of those around us. And we truly need wisdom in order to be able to make the right decisions. As mothers and as fathers, we face situations in raising our children that will turn our hair gray and add wrinkles to our faces. Some of y'all looking at me wondering how many kids I must have. Listen, I was talking with someone just the other day, and I mentioned how it seems like every time I get to the point where I feel like I get this parenting thing, that a whole new stage of life is thrown at me, and I realize how terrible I am. I'm not kidding. Those of you who have kids who are in their terrible twos right now, just hold on and wait till you're trying to parent adults. Every stage is harder than the one before. We need wisdom. So because we need wisdom, how do we get it? Well, King Solomon in the Bible is believed to have been the wisest man that ever lived. And the way that he got wisdom was asking the Lord for it. It's actually a pretty cool story. You can find it in a couple of places, but one of them is 1 Kings chapter 3. The Lord comes to Solomon in a dream. And he basically says, hey, I'm really proud of what you're doing. Ask me for anything you want. I mean, it was basically the whole genie situation, right? Shows up and says, I'll give you 3 wishes. Ask me for whatever you want. And Solomon didn't ask for cash. He didn't ask for fame. He didn't ask for 3 more wishes. He didn't do any of that. Solomon thought about the fact that he was a king and that he was going to have to make decisions that would affect everyone's lives. And he said, Lord, give me wisdom. And God did. The Bible tells us that God was so impressed that he asked for wisdom that he said, hey, I'm going to give you wisdom. And not only that, I'm also going to give you fame and wealth and all the other things. We read in James 1, verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God. Everybody say, ask God. Ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Deborah was a woman of wisdom. Mothers, if you want to be women of wisdom, I encourage you to ask God for it. And while you're at it, ask him to send some my way. The third thing I want you to notice about Deborah today is that Deborah was a woman of strength. She was a woman of courage. She wasn't a scared woman. You know, there's no indication anywhere in this passage that Deborah was a woman of war. In fact, there would be no reason for her to have been, right? Because in that day and age, women didn't go to war. Women didn't join the military. That was something that in that time that men did. Men went to war. But when Deborah gives Barak the message from the Lord, Barak is scared and he says to her, listen, if you go with me, I'll go. But if you don't, I ain't going. And Deborah, without skipping a beat, says, well, certainly I'll go with you. Sure, I'll go with you. This woman who is used to sitting under a palm tree deciding disputes between people packs her bags and heads off to war. A pretty scary thing to do, right? She was a woman of strength, a woman of courage. I'm starting to think that Proverbs 31 was written about Deborah. Because if you look at verse number 25, it says, she is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. Is there anybody other than me that wishes you had the courage to laugh at the days to come? I know I do. Listen, there's no telling how many times that I have either preached or talked to someone about Philippians 4, 6, and 7, where it says, be anxious about nothing, but in everything with prayer and petition, turn your request over to God. I've talked about it a lot. Or 2 Timothy 1:7, where it says, for the spirit that God gave us does not make us timid. The King James Version says, for God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of peace, love, and a sound mind. I know that scripture. I know that Jesus told us in Matthew 6:34, therefore do not worry about tomorrow. But in spite of knowing all those scriptures, and in spite of knowing that over 30 times in the Bible we are told to be strong and courageous, it's still really, really easy to live scared, isn't it? Especially when it comes to our kids. Deborah was a woman of strength, a woman of courage. So I ask again, if we want to be like that, if you want to be a woman of strength, raise your hand. None of the guys are raising their hands. I don't know why. So how do we get that? You know, I noticed something when I was studying this week. When the Bible talks about wisdom, it says if you lack wisdom, what are you supposed to do? Ask God for it. But you know what the Bible says when it talks about strength? It never says that. It says, take courage. have courage. Be strong. It never say ask it. It says take it, have it, and be it. This one's not on God. It's on us. It's our responsibility to have enough faith in God that we can stand firm and be strong and courageous in the face of trials. Deborah was a woman of God. She was a woman of wisdom, and she was a woman of courage. And the last thing I want you to notice as Christina comes is that she was a woman of encouragement. Deborah is actually known in many writings as the mother of courage, a woman of courage. Have you ever found yourself reading the Bible and thought, man, they left part of the story out? You ever see that? Does anybody other than me? Sometimes I'm reading and I'm like, I want to know, I wish Paul Harvey was here to tell me the rest of the story. Because, for example, the Bible doesn't tell us what Barak was doing before Deborah told him to go defeat Sisera. Gideon was another one of the judges. We've read Gideon's story before, right? And we know that before Gideon delivered the people of Israel, we know what he was doing. He was hiding in a wine press, threshing wheat, right? But we don't know what Barak's before was. We don't know what he was doing before. All we know is that he wasn't delivering Israel. He was somewhere doing something, or perhaps doing nothing, until Deborah, the mother of encouragement, told him, go get some soldiers and go fight Sisera. And then when he was scared to do it, he said, will you go with me? She said, yeah, I'll go with you. Now listen, she didn't pull any punches. She didn't tickle his ears just to be encouraging. She told him, yeah, I'll go with you, but just so you know, you're not going to get the honor of this whole deal. God's going to deliver Sisera into someone else's hands. She actually says God's going to deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman, which when you're reading the story, you think, oh, he's going to deliver him into the hands of Deborah. Well, that's not what actually happens. You can read the rest of the story later. But she goes with him. She encourages him. In Judges chapter 5, the very next chapter, Deborah and Barak sing a song of praise to the Lord for what he did, for the fact that he delivered the nation of Israel. And verses 6 and 7 of chapter 5 point specifically to Deborah's role as an encourager. Verse 6 says this, in the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned, travelers took winding paths. In other words, everybody was hiding. Nobody would go out on the highway. No one would go out on the main roads because they were scared. Everybody would take back roads, sneak around to get where they were going. And then verse number 7 says this, villagers in Israel would not fight. They held back until I, Deborah, arose. Until I arose, a mother in Israel. Church, Deborah was a woman of encouragement, and she saw that as the role of a mother. Her encouragement empowered Barak to live up to his full potential, just like the encouragement of a mother and a father enables our children to live up to their full potential. We don't know if Deborah had any children of her own. The Bible doesn't tell us. In fact, it's most likely that she didn't, because they're not mentioned. But we do know that she saw her role not just as a prophet, not just as a judge, but as a mother, an encourager in Israel. Now, I imagine most of us have seen firsthand the impact that encouragement can have on a person. Randy and Justin and I have seen it multiple times on the football field with third and fourth graders, haven't we? You get a kid out there that's scared of their own shadow. And sometimes you give them a little bit of help. You go to another kid and you whisper, hey, I want you to let them knock you down. They're like, what? Yeah, I want you to fall down when they hit you. Kid that's scared of his shadow goes up and taps them and they fall down, and then you cheer and holler and clap as loud as you can, and all of a sudden that's the strongest kid on the team. I mean, I've seen kids turn around, and I've seen it in adults too. You give someone some encouragement, and all of a sudden they can live up to their God-given potential. Today, what I want to do is I want to challenge our moms and our dads to encourage your children. Be their biggest supporters. Be their biggest fans. But don't stop there. Encourage those around you. Become a mother in Israel. Follow Paul's instructions from 1 Thessalonians 5:11, where he tells us to encourage one another and build one another up. Today we're talking about maternal traits. Deborah had these 4 important traits. She was a woman of God. She was a woman of wisdom. She was a woman of strength. And she was a woman of encouragement.